So the 10th Fazbear Frights book released yesterday, which was a nice little birthday present from Scott. I totally believed he had it planned that way. Sarcasm. But the title story of Friendly Faces certainly has a lot more to it than meets the eye. My original prediction that this could have been about Crying Child and how he became a robot is starting to look more likely now that the series has doubled its originally intended size. Now before we can get into the theory, I'm going to provide a synopsis so that we can actually have a better understanding about the story. And since the book has literally been out for a day at this point, this is your spoiler warning, because I'm nice. This theory, however, does currently only involve Friendly Faces and neither of the other two stories or the epilogue. So if you want to read it and then come back, go right ahead. It's okay. Your clicking on this already counts as a view. Okay, now that all the sissies are out of here, let's talk Fazbear Frights. Going by the synopsis on the wiki so that this information can be available to anyone and everyone even after you watch this video. Quote, Edward drops his bowl of cereal while he was distracted. His mother warns him to pay attention to his surroundings to avoid accidents. This dozing off also causes Edward to embarrass himself in science class when he pours pepper onto a magnet, which sprays the pepper everywhere and gets into the student's eyes. On the bus ride home, Edward laments to his friend Jack on how much he messes up, and how much he has to apologize for his mistakes. As the two get off the bus and walk home, Edward and Jack discover an abandoned kitten, which they named Faraday, after the famous scientist Michael Faraday. They begin teaching the cat tricks and formed a strong bond with it as the months go by. One day though, Faraday follows a butterfly onto the street. Jack chases it to try to keep him safe, but they both get hit by a truck and die. Having witnessed the accident, Edward is understandably traumatized and mourns their deaths, especially since they were his only two friends. While watching TV, an advertisement by Fazbear Entertainment abruptly appears, advertising their Fazbear Friendly Faces service. It's a program that recreates a lost pet by using the pet's DNA to create its face and then adds it to an animatronic body, creating a new companion in their image. Edward pays for the expensive service and took some hair from Faraday's corpse, accidentally taking some of Jack's hair as well. After a few weeks, a package from Fazbear Entertainment is sent to Edward's house, appearing in front of his doorstep on a stormy night. He is horrified by the cat inside, because it has Jack's face on it. The cat, called the Friendly Face, kept smiling at Edward, not moving at all. He forces the cat back into the box and then buries it in the backyard. Because, you know, that's gonna work. Despite being buried, the cat doesn't stop smiling. During the night, he hears sounds throughout the house, the hallway, the living room, his bedroom, and even from behind him, but Edward can't seem to find anything. He eventually heads back to bed, until the cat, still covered in mud, appears on his bed. Typical cats, man. His mother came in when she heard his screams, but the cat had disappeared. Months pass, and Edward sees the Friendly Face constantly stalking him. However, as soon as he sees it, it disappears. He almost goes insane as he started to hear ticking and chittering everywhere. As he is walking home one day, he finds his Friendly Face on the street. It chases Edward into the forest and tries to curl around his ankles. As he runs into the woods, though, he gets hit by a truck and dies from bleeding out. The Friendly Face then waits by Edward's limp, dead body, wanting him to get up so they can play some more. End quote. First of all, I just want to say that pepper thing, absolutely genius. I'm doing that later. Like, I'm going back to college specifically so I can do that. Anyway, with this we can instantly establish our main characters, Edward, Jack, and the cat known as Faraday. There are a couple of things that stick out to me because of this. One, that Jack and Evan share the same amount of letters, which isn't much on its own, and I mean, like, Evan isn't even a confirmed name, but it's still something. And Edward and Jack are also two names that I've seen people call Crying Child in the comments on multiple occasions. This story also revolves around someone's love that ends up making a robotic version of a loved one, even if accidental. That's also in a way what many people believe happened to Crying Child, that he became an animatronic by possessing either Fredbear or Golden Freddy, which would be a combination of animal and animatronic, even if it's not to this literal an extent. The story also proves that it's still canon for animatronics to be created with the intent of bringing back a loved one, similar to what we see happen with Henry and Charlie Emily in the original novel trilogy. And considering how Scott said these books would help fill in some blanks from the past, it's worth taking note of since this proves that animatronics can be created in people's images, and it's drawing attention to that point like it's still important. And even if it was meant to be a cat, it still has part of Jack inside, like how a robot would still have the human still inside of them even if it's in a coded form. Plus, I mean, like, the cat who Edward intended on bringing back was named Faraday, after the famous scientist Michael Faraday. And I think we all know who the most famous Michael on this channel is. Yes, the older brother, who I keep saying is a robot. And here we are, with a robot cat whose name just so happens to be based off of Michael. Coincidence? I think not! Especially when this robot who's named after a Michael has someone else inside them. Someone whose name has 4 letters. Like how I've been suggesting that Michael is a robot version of Crying Child who's implanted with different memories and told that he killed his brother so that he wouldn't return to Fazbear restaurants. Or at the very least, Crying Child ends up possessing Michael after he dies in the hospital, since that would also make more sense and explain the hallucinations and whatever else we see. Now, there is definitely more to this theory that I can investigate. However, I haven't actually received my book in the mail yet. I mean, like, I pre-ordered it on Amazon, and hopefully it will be here soon. But when it does, I assure you that I will make a follow-up or an update to this theory, whether it helps my case or ruins it. But I have a feeling that there is certainly more to this story than meets the eye. Or I guess meets the mind, since, you know, you're not really, like, you're reading it, so you're not, like, seeing it like you would like a game or a movie. But I guess you also typically read with your eyes. But then again, I don't know if this was made in Braille. Anyway, you know what I mean. My biggest issue with the FNAF series has been logical inconsistencies. I mean, sure, we don't know the full story, so things could make sense in the end, but with what we currently know, there are a lot of things that don't quite fit into place. One of the biggest inconsistencies, in my opinion at least, is what we're exploring today. Now, having inconsistencies is understandable and it's to be expected. Anything that has this kind of lore and this amount of content is bound to have a couple flaws. Take How I Met Your Mother, for example. They have Barney driving in multiple episodes, but then later have Ted teach Barney how to drive after some of those moments would have already happened. Or in Supernatural, when in season 2 Dean mentions never having been to the Grand Canyon, yet 6 seasons later Sam remembers a trip when they went there when he was 4. This was admitted to be a mistake on the writer's part, but discrepancies like that are to be expected when talking about a series as big as this. But the inconsistency I'd like to address here is the nightmare animatronics, and I've had an excellent idea that would explain away the whole kerfuffle with them. As we learn at the end of FNAF 4, Crying Child was in a coma for the entirety of the main FNAF 4 game after getting chomped by Fredbear, meaning that every animatronic we see in the main gameplay would be taking place inside of Crying Child's head. So all the nightmare animatronics along with the Jacko animatronics would be created in his mind. And since Crying Child dies at the end of the game, getting the plug pulled or just giving up on fighting, there wouldn't be any way for anyone else to know what these animatronics looked like. Yet they still appear in future games like Ultimate Custom Night and FNAF VR. So what gives? What's the deal? How could this be possible? And I have a satisfactory conclusion that is bound to make some of you mad. And isn't that the best kind? If we go back to a previous theory video entitled We Were Wrong About Golden Freddy on this channel, we can see that I proposed the idea that Crying Child is actually the one you should not have killed. Not many people seem to be happy with this idea in the comments section, but hey, that's alright, I'm a big kid now, I can take it. However, if Crying Child was the one you should not have killed, it would help explain the discrepancies with these animatronics in such an easy way. First, let's go over the evidence again as to how the Crying Child is the one you should not have killed. In room 1280 of Heracles Hospital, something evil is keeping a man alive. A man with gruesome burns all over his body and an iron will to live. The man in room 1280 is the third story of the 5th Fazbear Frights book Bunny Call. The story, written by Andrea Wagner, revolves around a man with, as the book summary described, horrific burns all over his body. His organs are exposed, his face is missing, he has burn marks everywhere. This man was taken off life support years prior to the story, yet somehow is still able to live. He's still alive. The story ends with this horrifically damaged man being taken to a Fazbear Entertainment distribution center where he promptly explodes violently. This story is obviously meant to represent, or very well be, William Afton, who did end up escaping the FNAF 6 fire, but was horribly damaged because of it. The story was meant to show us that William had a soul possessing him, the soul of a young boy with curly black hair, rosy cheeks, and an alligator mask. And the description of the young boy with curly black hair would also fit the Crying Child. This also proves to us that the one possessing William was a male and not a female, so it couldn't be Cassidy. This also explains why we were so confused about the lines discussing the one you should not have killed, since they all refer to him as a boy if it includes a gender-based pronoun. Example, I have seen him, the one you should not have killed.
I have see him, the one you shouldn't have killed.
There is no reference to any form of female, which we thought made sense because Golden Freddy is a male character, but why would they be referring to a female spirit as the animatronic they inhabited? Also, how could Cassidy possess two things at the same time, especially when one of them is a human? When Crying Child died, there was also no animatronic around for him to possess. It would make more sense for him to possess William since he would have to be in the vicinity after signing the papers to let his son go. Everything lines up for Crying Child to really be the one you should not have killed, keeping his father alive after seeing all the horrific deeds he's committing in an effort to bring him back, or just because he's his father after all. He brainwashed Elizabeth, so why not brainwash Crying Child as well?
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed.
I am fully convinced that Crying Child was the one possessing his father and keeping him alive, since if that was the case, it explains the other appearances of the animatronics that only Crying Child would know about. Since Ultimate Custom Night also takes place in William's head, which can't be a coincidence given this series now. That's how the Nightmare animatronics were able to appear and torture William, and that's why the characters who mention the one you should not have killed, Mangle, Withered Chica, Nightmare Freddy, and Jacko Chica, all share some form of Nightmare version or connection to FNAF 4. There are also multiple lines that refer to your situation, such as "This is how it feels."
This is how it feels, and you get to experience it over and over and over again. Forever. I will never let you leave.
Which could be referencing being hunted down by animatronics, but why would someone who was killed by William reference gameplay that another character has to deal with? Instead, I think it's a reference to your current situation, where you're in a coma and this is what it feels like. We also know that the sound disc was not to blame for the Nightmare animatronics, since Nightmare Freddy himself says that he was now given flesh.
I am given flesh to be your tormentor.
And the disc can seemingly only alter the appearance of something, meaning it would already need to have at least some form of flesh to alter. These are all hints about who is really possessing William, and it also explains how they're appearing in the next games. Since after waking up from his coma, William could have easily written descriptions down, or created them himself when he was possessing the hard drive that gets scanned to help make the animatronic AI in Help Wanted. Him seeing these animatronics in his coma thanks to his son's spirit is the reason these are in the game, because William brought them in with him. It's insane that it took me this long to figure out, but also I never saw this pointed out in any of the comments on these videos, so it's something that I'm sure a lot of people managed to piece together. It's an elegant solution that easily fits one of the most frustrating elements of the games into place. Now, however, I just need to figure out how Michael knew what Nightmare looked like, so he could draw it in the survival logbook. That's a mystery I'll never quite understand, really, since he would only be able to learn about it if William told him after he learned about them, but Michael burns in FNAF 6, so that should be impossible, because William doesn't learn about them until Ultimate Custom Night, which takes place after FNAF 6. And Crying Child couldn't have told his brother since he died in FNAF 4 after seeing these animatronics, so how could he know? Let me know your thoughts down below. The mystery of who he plays in Security Breach still remains an unanswered question. The silent video game tester who takes over after Tape Girl is a character that could have much more significance than we originally thought. And while the first 6 games we play as Michael, in Ultimate Custom Night we play as William, the villain. So could that be more widespread than we thought? That's what we're exploring today. Let's start off with some explanations. Who is Vanny? Vanny is the apparent primary antagonist of the next FNAF game Security Breach, which at the time of filming doesn't have a release date. Vanny, also known as the Reluctant Follower, was grabbed a hold of by Glitch Trap in some form and has now 2 consciousnesses in her head. Hers that googles the migration pattern of bees, and William's that googles how far can a human be tortured before passing out and how to induce compliance in human subjects, as we learned from FNAF AR emails, which seems to indicate that Vanny isn't entirely under his control. However, we don't know where she came from, only that she's most likely both Vanny and the security guard Vanessa. We also know that Vanny, when William is making her speak, has glitchy vocal cords somehow, and will fumble words like we see in the security breach trailers, particularly when she says it was only a glitch. So it's safe to say that when she is killing, or at least being aggressive or violent, she isn't in control of her body, and rather it's William. This is the second closest we actually get to interacting with William directly, since the closest we got was FNAF 3, since, you know, he was alive inside Springtrap, but now he's alive inside Fanny. Alive. We had a whole separate video on how he's not technically alive. Go check that out. Now, this all seems well and good, but how would we be Vanny? After all, there is no evidence to suggest it, right? Well, not necessarily. Technically, if you want to use that argument, we also have no evidence that we aren't Vanny. At first, I thought we were Gabriel, someone who shares a name with the child who goes on to possess Freddy, much like the Jeremy we hear about from Tape Girl. But now I am absolutely certain that we play as a woman named Vanessa who takes over playtesting after Tape Girl's company sends the game to another company, as we hear Tape Girl describe in her recordings. This must be the company that we work for just because it makes sense. As to who we are, that's where the theorizing comes in. There isn't much to go on in the main game since, well, most of it revolves around finding Glitch Trap, but at the end when we successfully find all 16 tapes, we do end up merging with Glitch Trap, which does line up with what we think happened to Vanessa, so there's one point right there. There's also all the circumstantial evidence that supports this hypothesis, like Vanessa as we know her being a security guard, just like we play as in the VR game most of the time. The similarities between her story and the story we know about our character, the knowledge that we are not Tape Girl and neither is Vanny since she's working at a company handling the FNAF VR animatronics, etc. Where we can really find evidence to support this, and what made me solidly believe this theory, is in the mobile port of FNAF VR, of all places. Because due to size constraints, we were reduced to some of the mini games from VR, with the addition of a secret one, only accessible via clicking or interacting with objects with glitching textures, but clearly intentional glitches. Tapping on these a lot and zooming in will eventually cause you to be brought back to the main home screen, and a monitor next to the main system will have a secret minigame called Princess Quest. I talked about this in a recent video, however I wanted to go more in depth here. Princess Quest is a special minigame from Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted exclusive to mobile ports. The minigame can be accessed from the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience main hub room, and occasionally a grid pattern will appear on objects at the prize counter. To unlock Princess Quest, the player must zoom in on one of these glitching objects. Afterwards, the screen will fade to black and fade back in to the level select with everything unlocked, along with Princess Quest shown on the right monitor, the little tiny one. The player starts out in a room with a door that they cannot open, and they have to light all 4 torches in the next room to make the actual door open in the first room. This is just to show you how to play the game, basically. The player will then end up in a room full of floating glitch trap heads that will attack them. After lighting the torches in that room, you can now go into the next room and get the key. And glitch trap blockers will block the door and attack the player if they get too close. Wonderful. This game basically serves as a way to get Glitch Trap into the game because, you know, they couldn't have him because it's a freaking mobile port. And throughout the entire minigame, only 16 torches are found that can be lit up. And this is possibly, but most definitely, a metaphor to the 16 tapes found in the original version of Help Wanted, showing how we as the player collected the tapes and then inadvertently summoned Glitch Trap in his physical form. And then, you know, he kind of melted our brains. If this is indeed the case, then that single minigame serves as an overview for the entirety of FNAF VR. Since after lighting the 16th, well, the games call them torches, but they're really braziers, but after lighting the 16th one, a Glitch Trap sprite will appear, saying his signature line of "I always come back" in coded text at the bottom, as well as saying "I always come back, let me out" if you take the sound that plays during that scene, double the speed, and reverse it, which just serves as confirmation that Glitch Trap is actually this character and just not some ripoff thrown in for fan service. But this is where the theory really comes through. If this Princess Quest minigame serves as an overview for all of FNAF VR, then that's confirmation right there that our player character in FNAF VR is female, since that's who we play as in this game, going around lighting torches or collecting cassette tapes and eventually accidentally reassembling Glitch Trap. With our character being female, and obviously not Tape Girl, we don't have many options left. We must be Vanny. However, this brings me to my next point. What if Glitchtrap is possessing multiple people and not just us? Couldn't Vanny just be somewhere else and we're another unlucky victim? Well, this could be true, but I don't think it is. I don't think Glitchtrap can possess multiple people at once, and I think that Help Wanted has been telling us this from the get-go and we never noticed. After the final showdown, if you successfully follow Tape Girl's instructions, you lock yourself in your own mind. The Glitchtrap manifestation that appears turns into a green rabbit plush that spawns on the ground where he used to stand. This single moment indicates to us that we are now actually possessed. If we don't follow the instructions though, we end up merging with him on stage, but that's just simply in the game. That isn't in the real world. Yet if you're focused on trying to do the complicated process properly to actually fend him off, your mind is vulnerable. You aren't fighting off Glitchtrap, and instead you're trying to press things in the right order, which basically gives Glitchtrap an access tunnel into your psyche, thus being able to shut you away. Obviously this doesn't work forever, since Vanny seems to have no recollection of what Glitchtrap does, but nonetheless the answer was right in front of us the whole time. Once Glitchtrap actually gets into our mind, we can see that he can no longer manifest in the game and is replaced by something so that the game doesn't break, because you know, code. Glitchtrap cannot be in two places at once, therefore he cannot possess multiple people at once, meaning that the one he does possess, who ends up being us at the end of Help Wanted, must be Vanny, just based on, just by default. There's nobody else that it could be. It's literally impossible. This is how, it is what it is. That's the way the news goes. There we have it, friends. We are Vanny. I know that this is, from what I've seen, generally accepted amongst a fair amount of the community at least, but I figured I'd make a video about it so anyone who wasn't sure can have some level of clarity that our player character in FNAF VR is Vanessa. Well, not I guess the actual avatar in game, but the person in the FNAF universe who controls that avatar at the same time we're controlling the avatar. It's confusing, but then again, it's FNAF, so that's kind of par for the course. I started this video with a simple question. How long would Fazbear Entertainment have to hold on to the toy animatronics without gutting them if they were going to reuse them in Security Breach? This simple question led me down a path that totally upended everything I thought I knew about this series. So throw all past theories and knowledge out, because I'm about to blow your mind with time travel and the revelation that Security Breach is happening sooner than you think. Starting with FNAF 4 in 1983. So the timeline starts off with not FNAF 2 like I've been thinking, but rather with FNAF 4. FNAF 4 takes place in 1983 as we see from the Fredbear and Fred's cartoon on the TV in Crying Child's house, which is already weird because of the lead up to Security Breach, but that's a whole other can of worms. At this point in the timeline though, William has already built the Springlock animatronics and the Funtime animatronics, since Elizabeth had already been gotten by Circus Baby. That is seemingly the only explanation we have for the stomach mounds on the Nightmare animatronics. So even before the first game starts, a Fazbear location closed down, and probably the local one, so William opened up Circus Babies to keep up his killing spree. And then it got closed down as well after the first day because his daughter gets scooped. We then have the events of FNAF 4 when Crying Child is having his birthday at Freddy's come the end of the week. When he gets there though, he's scared because he watched his sister get scooped, and then he ends up getting shoved into Fredbear's mouth and put in a coma. After fighting through a nightmare trying to stay alive, William pulls the plug and promises to put him back together. It's another question if he actually does though. Crying Child dies and then probably goes on to possess his father as the one you should not have killed. Next we have Into the Pit in 1985. And while this next moment in the timeline isn't a part of the games, it's an important moment because it's the moment time travel, like real actual time travel, is introduced into the series through a ball pit of all places. This is the half of the story that takes place in 1985 before the missing children's incident, where Oswald is jumping in and out of the ball pit to play with his new friends Chip and Mike, who are around his age, which is around 11. But one day when he comes out of the ball pit, he hears screaming and ends up being lured into a room with 6 dead kids, a representation for Charlie, Gabriel, Fritz, Jeremy, Susie, and Cassidy. He then runs into the ball pit to return to his current year in order to escape Spring Bonnie. Then we have FNAF 2 in 1987. Thanks to the date we see on the paychecks we get at the end of the game, we know this to be true. This is after the missing children's incident, but the year of the bite of 87, which is when, presumably, the night guard Jeremy gets his frontal lobe bitten off, and then gets promoted to the day shift, which is where we come in. This is the grand reopening after the 1985 fiasco that resulted in the restaurant closing its doors, as we see in the news clippings from FNAF 1, and is when the toy animatronics are created and used, installed with a criminal database in an effort to prevent another incident from occurring. Whether they actually have these things or are just said to have them for parents to feel better is one question, but even if they did have them, we know that William is the suit technician, meaning that if they did have a database, he'd have programmed it and certainly would not include himself. At this point, we see another set of killings and the toy animatronics get scrapped, whereas the withered ones, which were the original animatronics that got the kids stuffed inside them 2 years prior, are sent out to be repaired and sent to a new, smaller location. This location runs for a few years before FNAF 1 in 1993. FNAF 1, while being the first game ever released, does not take place first in the timeline. If only it were that clean. Instead, it takes place in 1993 or around then, based on minimum wage calculations MatPat did in his first ever FNAF theory, and Scott pretty much confirming this to be correct. We can also look at the FAS facts presented in FNAF AR's files that say, quote, in 1993, the most dangerous profession in the United States was actually night security guard, which seems to indicate that the first game takes place in 1993, since we know the dates of the other games where we're actually security guards. This is also in line with the Nathan Dunlap story MatPat believed the first game to be based off of, however that could also be a coincidence. This is where we see the original 5 animatronics repaired after FNAF 2's location closed, and seemingly the first game where we play as Michael Afton, since at this point he'd be old enough to hold down a full-time job, being around 21 years old if we go off his character and Into the Pit. Speaking of which, that's our next stop. Into the Pit in 2011. Into the Pit is a difficult story to place timeline-wise, other than the part that takes place in 85. So how am I certain it takes place in 2011? Well, when Oswald is describing the town in the first few pages of the story, he says that the town went downhill after the mill had closed down. So I looked into towns that went downhill after some form of mill shut down that fit other requirements that he had listed. It had to have a movie theater like Oswald said his town did, and it had to still have a population despite being mostly run down. And the closest one that I could actually find was Scotia, California, whose Pacific Lumber Company closed in 2008 and was founded in 1863, meaning it would certainly be around for 1985 when the town is thriving, as we see in the story. And since Oswald also notes that 3 years ago is when the mill closed down, when he was 8, we can reasonably assume that since Pacific Lumber closed in 2008 that he was born in 2000 and is 11 years old at the time of the story, since it's 3 years after they closed. The population of Scotia is also only 850, which also would fit the story. Now this is important because of where the timeline goes next and how time travel could actually be involved. It also gives us an age for Mike, who, based on the kid from 1985's part of the story, was around Oswald's age that year, and considering how Crying Child died in 1983, 2 years before that part, it would most likely be the older brother who'd be 11 at that time, which also fits since he's wearing a hat and participating at a Freddy's, which the teen would really not want to do. Then we have FNAF AR in 2021. Okay, so based on dates that we can see on various emails from FNAF AR, which is where most of the lore resides in this game, the events of Special Delivery actually take place in 2021, this year, which is honestly really messed up for the timeline. I went into this wanting to see how long they'd have to hold on to the toy animatronics to see if they could be the basis for the Glamrock animatronics, yet I found out that FNAF AR takes place in 2021, meaning one of 4 things. Ness could not be Vanny, since Glitch Trap hasn't been created yet, since William hasn't even been found in the back room of Fazbear's Fright. 2, that the AR game is simply not canon to the story, which throws out all the fast facts and the emails as actual lore. 3, that Glitch Trap is able to time travel thanks to being present in technology or something similar like the ball pit from Into the Pit, which is possible since we know that time travel is possible in this universe, which is why I included Into the Pit in this video in the first place. Or 4, that Vanny isn't possessed by Glitch Trap and isn't a reluctant follower after all, and is instead a copycat. We can't know for sure which of these are the case until Security Breach actually comes out, and honestly that could ruin this whole video, but if we run on the assumption that Ness is Vanessa, aka Vanny, then Security Breach would also take place in 2021, if the FNAF AR emails match with the events of the games at least, meaning that somehow Vanny got possessed by Glitch Trap before he was ever created. If this game does not take place in 2021, however, we can rework this yet again come the game's release, but at this point, all we've got to go off of is the FNAF AR emails, which seem to indicate this. This could also cause issues like if Springtrap isn't going to be discovered for another couple years, why are there versions of him being released to the public in FNAF AR? Because, like, they wouldn't know that he existed yet, right? A simple explanation to that is that they just found Springtrap before the events of FNAF 3, yet if this game does take place in 2021, it is actually possible for Vanessa to be a secret 4th Afton kid because they'd be the proper age and they do have a striking resemblance to Elizabeth. Next, we have FNAF in 2023. FNAF 3 may also not have a simple timeline placement, however, the game description places it 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's closes, and the most recent closure we've seen would be the FNAF 1 closure in 1993, which would place FNAF 3 in 2023, which hasn't even happened in real life yet, so maybe we'll get a real Freddy Fazbear's for ourselves. This is when Springtrap is released in a new horror-themed Freddy's location called Fazbear's Fright, with seemingly no connection to the books, and is the company's first attempt at repairing their reputation by leaning into the horror genre. However, Henry ends up burning this place to the ground with William inside as well as the puppet, as we can see on a rare screen, except it doesn't work and William survives, because of course he does. This is also where we learn that the spirits of the original 5 missing children were put to rest in the Happiest Day minigame, which we must complete as Henry, based on Orville Elephant's dialogue in Ultimate Custom Night, and the secret final cutscene of Sister Location that shows down burnt Fazbear's Fright. Next up we have Sister Location, which is also most likely happening in 2023. Sister Location also probably takes place around the same time. We know at the very least it has to, thanks to that ending I mentioned moments ago, where Michael is describing how he's going to come find his father, where we see a burnt down Fazbear's Fright and Springtrap popping up from its ruins. This means that the game must happen at least at the same time, since at the moment of this line he hadn't found his father yet, which also means that we couldn't have played as Mike in FNAF 3 because he wouldn't be saying that he's going to come find you, because he already would have. This could be a flash forward, but I don't think that that could be the case, since at that point he'd be purple and smelling horrible, and if people are running away from him scared on the street when he's walking, how would they hire him to be the night guard at a Freddy's joint? Like, even if it is horror themed, he's there after hours and doesn't need to look the part. So the most likely scenario is that after William was released, he somehow instructed Michael to go find his sister. Or Baby actually ended up mimicking William in order to lure Mike down there, since she knew he wouldn't die and Ennard would be able to use him as a skin suit. Either way, it makes the most sense for the events of the main game of Sister Location to take place in 2023, whereas the events of the 8-bit sections take place before 1983, which are also the earliest moments we've seen in the series. Then we have FNAF 6, which takes place sometime after 2023. Now, I've had a hard time placing FNAF 6's exact time. I have yet to find that smoking gun that gives me how many years after 2023 the game takes place, yet we know it has to take place after 2023 for various reasons. One, the inclusion of Scraptrap. Whether it's a more deformed Springtrap suit or a new one altogether, William wasn't released until 2023, so it has to be after. 2. Scrap Baby. Baby gets kicked out of the Ennard tribe between games in the source code for Scott's website, meaning that it has to take place after Sister Location, which seems to also happen in 2023. 3. The appearance of the Paper Pals, who made their debut in FNAF 3. 4. The appearance of both Henry and Mike, who decide to stay while the building is burning. And 5. Lefty, who was created to keep the puppet in that location so Charlie would actually be set free, since the puppet also escaped in FNAF 3 or was never there to begin with, which made Henry sure that it would be there this time. This is where we see the story attempt to be put to rest, with Baby, the puppet, Molten Freddy, who is a combination of all the Funtime animatronics, and Scraptrap all burning. But we know that William as Scraptrap escapes, even if horrifically burned by the fire, removing the entire Scraptrap suit and landing him in the hospital in a coma. That's where Ultimate Custom Night takes place, after the FNAF 6 fire. Ultimate Custom Night must take place after the FNAF 6 fire because it takes place in William's head, much like how FNAF 4 was in the Crying Child's head. Another reason I believe Crying Child to be the one you should not have killed. In addition to that, we see characters that made their first appearance in FNAF 6 present to torment William in Ultimate Custom Night, most notably the Rockstar animatronics and the Mediocre Melodies. This is also where we learn that Henry was the one who tried to release the original 5 missing children, thanks to Orville Elephant saying, quote, "He tried to release you, he tried to release us." However, running alongside alongside this are the events prior to the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, which shows us what it's like in the real world during the events of Ultimate Custom Night. Since we're told that William has been there years prior to the story starting, this means that he's being tortured by the one you should not have killed for at least 2 years, as we learn, since he had, quote, been taken off life support years ago. While it could be more than 2, it has to at least be a couple years since the word years is in plural. And then finally, we have FNAF VR, which takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 and 2 years after William was taken off life support, since the priest who shows up in The Man in Room 1280 to read him his last rites was asked to do so again, quote, years after he was taken off life support, notice the plural, which happened at least 2 years after the FNAF 6 expired. At this point, if FNAF 3, 6, and 7 all take place one after each other, we'd be in 2027 at the very least. And we know that this game has to take place after FNAF 6 and The Man in Room 1280 thanks to the appearance of Glitch Trap, who appeared by scanning a circuit board to help create the AI, and Helpy, who makes an appearance as an Easter egg character and a main character in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. Helpy was introduced in FNAF 6, so it has to at least come after that, and we see the circuit board be created in The Man in Room 1280 when the priest brings William to a Fazbear Entertainment warehouse where he promptly explodes, meaning at the very least FNAF VR takes place in 2027, which is 6 years after FNAF AR and probably Security Breach, which begs the question, since William only becomes Glitch Trap 6 years after Ness is acting weird, as if she is possessed, this seems to be impossible unless Ness isn't possessed, isn't Vanny, or Glitch Trap is somehow able to time travel. But has time travel been established in the games? Actually, it might have been. See, one Twitter user pointed out to me that the animatronic arm we see at the end of the Security Breach gameplay trailer looks an awful lot like Nightmare Freddy's arm. And if that is the case, firstly it would require the Nightmare animatronics to have some real physical forms, unless they're doing some dream hopping, but it would also require time travel, since FNAF 4 is the first game in the timeline, taking place in 1983, 38 years before the earliest events of Security Breach if it does take place in 2021, which it seems to. Huh. Interesting. There we have it, friends. How long is the FNAF timeline? 44 years at its most conservative, assuming that FNAF 3, 5, 6, and 7 all take place in 2023. Okay, so a couple videos ago I suggested that thanks to the FNAF AR email dates, that Security Breach, if Vanny is supposed to be possessed, that it would have to come before FNAF 3, and while some of you are accepting and appreciative of that theory, many people I seemed, should I say, hesitant to accept my ideas and proposed that, quote, I actually do some research. So I did, and I'm here to say that I found it, baby. Now, just to go over things first, what was my original timeline proposed in that last theory? Well, it starts with FNAF 4 in 1983 that we see thanks to the TV in Crying Child's house. Then we see the 1985 part of Into the Pit, followed by FNAF 2 and Freddy Fazbear's grand reopening in 1987. FNAF 1 takes place after that in 1993, calculated by Matt Patton in his first theory video, as well as being confirmed by a Faz fact from FNAF AR. Then comes Into the Pit with the present day, at least the present day in the book, and I'm including Into the Pit because time travel would technically be required, and Into the Pit is what introduces time travel. And then we run into FNAF AR. Now, the FNAF AR emails have dates ranging the game from 2019 to 2021, which I'm guessing is dependent on when you are actually playing the game, since it's meant to be the present day. And since Security Breach is linked to special delivery via those emails and Ness along with the other weird happenings, we can reasonably assume that Security Breach would come next. Then we have to fast forward 2 years and see FNAF 3 with the Fazbear Frights attraction and sister location happening simultaneously thanks to the secret sister location ending. And to end the current timeline, we have FNAF 6, Ultimate Custom Night, and VR happening one after each other. However, we only know that FNAF VR takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 thanks to the Man in Room 1280 from Bunny Call, the most controversial point in this timeline being FNAF 3 taking place after Security Breach and AR, which a lot of people seem to have issues with. Obviously, there are some discrepancies that need to be made when talking about the FNAF timeline, since as Scott sees the story play out in his mind, previous moments may not align to a perfect fit, so information that is revealed later should be taken as a priority, like MatPat stated in his most recent timeline video after Ultimate Custom Night's release. So they didn't find Springtrap until night 2 of FNAF 3 would have to be replaced with them discovering Springtrap sooner than we thought, but only releasing him later on while trying to test to make sure everything was working before opening Fazbear's Fright. so that he could then appear as a character in special delivery, maybe perhaps as a way to hype up the actual location. But there's another problem that I want to address, saying that we have seen a Spring Bonnie time travel before, like in Into the Pit, so time travel is not out of the question for this scenario. There also seem to be quite a few people who believe that FNAF 3 takes place in 2013, since we know that the FNAF 4 location closed thanks to Crying Child getting chomped, so 30 years after 1983 would be 2013. However, the description for FNAF 3 states that, quote, 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, meaning that the establishment was indeed called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and to our understanding, that bite incident from FNAF 4 actually took place in Fredbear's Family Diner, thanks to the limited number of animatronics as well as them both being gold. While yes, other Freddy Fazbear's locations at this time were open, this incident did not occur at one, and this begs the question, does FNAF 3 rather take place in 2017, after the FNAF 2 location closes? Well, if we look back at that quote again, we know that that's not the case, since it says itself that, quote, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, which couldn't be the case, given that the FNAF 1 location that takes place in 1993 wouldn't be open if that's really what happened. If the 1987 location was the last one to close, it would make sense, but there being another Freddy Fazbear's open in 1993 means that the tragedies have not yet become a distant memory, especially since they're posting news clippings about the original incidents on the walls. And even if we didn't put them there, someone else is posting them on the wall as a prank. Sure, the hallucinations may be what causes them to change, but they're not the reason they're actually on the wall. We can still see the articles when we aren't hallucinating anyways, like in the first few nights. So why do I think that FNAF 3 has to take place after Security Breach? Because there seems to be a lot going on. Hell, what I'm saying now could even be pointing towards Security Breach taking place in the 80s if you look at it a certain way, since thanks to Montgomery Gator we have all the proof we need. Take a look at the characters in the background of the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3, the ones in color at least. They have various different masks on that are each pretty much explained away thanks to the mediocre melodies introduced in FNAF 6, Pig Patch, Orville Elephant, and the Hippo guy. However, there are a couple outliers even with these other animatronics. The first one being the very first guy on this lineup who's wearing a green mask, which absolutely could be referring to Happy Frog, but that doesn't look like a freaking frog to me. Are you kidding? Frogs don't have those kind of faces. Even animatronic ones would not have a snout that goddamn long. A frog's face does not come out to here, people, okay? You know what does though? Alligators. And who do we see in Security Breach? A green alligator with a long snout. Who else do we see? A wolf who maybe seems to be the same color that Bonnie was, which as we learn is supposed to be blue despite looking purple. And what other mask do we see that doesn't have a mediocre melodies equivalent? A blue mask with a snout like a wolf would have. Interesting. So, are the two new main lineup animatronics actually present in the Happiest Day minigame? We can't say for certain after all because these are 8-bit, but it certainly makes a hell of a lot more sense now, right? Plus I don't care if it's a robotic frog or not, okay? No frog is going to have that freaking snout, okay? It's not gonna be out here and it's not gonna be this thin, okay? That's an alligator. So there we have it, friends, the smoking gun that explains how Security Breach could take place before FNAF 3, based on FNAF AR emails, the closing of FNAF 1's location, and the Happiest Day minigame. Everyone who was telling me I was wrong in the comments can finally accept that it's a possibility.